Now, we're going to cross to the US later about the horror in Texas, but first, an even greater horror in its scale that's been exposed by an extraordinary hack into the police files of the communist dictatorship of China. Now, we already know, as I've shown on the show, that the Chinese Communist Party is committing a terrible crime in its mainly Muslim province of Xinjiang in China's west. It has locked up what we estimate to be 1 million Muslim Uighurs to re-educate them, to be loyal to China, to be less, Muslim, less Uighur. But we haven't had many faces to put to this cultural genocide, nor have we learned the full scale of what China is doing. Until now, an astonishing breakthrough. Adrian Zenz is the Director of China Studies at the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation in Washington, and is an advisor to the Interparliamentary Alliance on China, whose co-chair, by the way, was my late friend Kimberly Kitching, the Labour Senator. Now, Zenz has today published explosive files hacked from Chinese government websites that include around 2,900 pictures of Uyghurs arrested by China and sent for re-education or punishment or slave labour. And when you see these faces, you can tell that China has been lying about what it's actually doing in Xinjiang. Now, it's been saying, well, look, all it's doing is just fighting Islamist extremists and terrorists. But when you see these Uyghurs, including teenagers as young as 14, like this girl, and when you also see how old other detainees are, a woman in her 70s, for instance, others in their 60s, you know this is not about terrorism. This is cultural genocide. Now, other photos that have been hacked show how police treat these prisoners, at least how they treat them when they know the boss is looking, and how they use cameras to spy on other Muslims in mosques. And then there are the documents. To explain what all this tells us, I am joined by Adrian Zenz. Adrian Zenz, thank you so much for joining me, and congratulations on this amazing story that you've been able to produce. How did you get this information?
This information was passed to me, which is not the first time, because I have now for several years specialized in researching and analyzing and authenticating Chinese government documents, both public and internal.
And it comes from a hack into, among other things, a hack into the computer systems of Chinese police and others. Is that correct?
That is correct. It comes from external penetration into computers, not somebody from the government leaking it. And that's also the reason why the material is very direct, very blunt, and it's really files that we've never seen. Probably a lot of officials don't necessarily have access to some of these files.
What do you think is the broad picture that it paints that we haven't been aware of until now?
So much of it is confirmation of existing knowledge and witness accounts that the camps are run like prisons, very stringent security, very high expectations on a securitization and a large scale. The files show hundreds of spreadsheets indicate that over 12% of adults in one entire Uyghur county were in some form of internment. But the files also really shed some new light on the atrocity. Firstly, Xi Jinping personally authorizing and commanding for camps to be expanded, enlarged, and getting new guards, more staff because they're overcrowded. He's been informed about that fact. Secondly, XINJIANG, former party secretary, just being very blunt about it and just really saying, you got to arrest the Uyghurs, handcuff them, shackle them, and kill them if necessary, so they don't escape when they're being arrested.
Adrian, two of the things that really leapt out at me from what you've found, one is the sheer number. Until now, I've gone along with the consensus that we're talking about up to 1 million Uyghurs in these concentration camps. You think it could be almost double that. And the other thing that I was really struck by, particularly with the photos that you've found of the inmates, how young some of these people are. There are, of course, quite old people who will spend the rest of their lives, it seems, in concentration camps, but some as young as 14. Can you talk to us about that?
Yes, that is truly one of the most shocking aspects of this new data leak. 14, 15, 16-year-old teenagers, girls, being in re-education simply because one of the parents was imprisoned or detained, or there's some guilt by association, some association to somebody the police had an eye on or had detained. Truly shocking information. Important new data points on the apparent scale of the mass internments with, as I said, if over 12% of the ethnic population of one county, the adults, was interned in 2018, that basically scales up, even if you reduce it for some of the northern counties, to well over 1 million for all of Xinjiang. And very pointedly, China's own Minister of Public Security in 2018, visiting Xinjiang, said over 2 million Uyghurs suffer from extremist thinking, which is one of the key things they're trying to treat or cure with re-education. And in addition to that, there's at least 2 million ethnic groups in Xinjiang who believe in sort of pan-Islamism or pan-Turkism, simply linking to a Turkic heritage. That reference can refer to any Turkic group, not just Uyghurs, but also Kazakh and Kyrgyz, of which there are quite a few, and millions of them live outside of southern Xinjiang, which is the reference to Zhao Keji's, the minister's first reference. So he mentions two groups of 2 million, which have a partial overlap, but also a lot of non-overlap. So quite the statements to analyze and indicate the scale of the mass internment campaign.
We're seeing, as I say, children as young as 14, teenagers. We're seeing people who are clearly in their 50s, 60s, 70s, who got the ages with them. We're talking, this is not, these aren't people that have been arrested because of terrorism, which has been Beijing's excuse, that they're terrorists, they're related, etc., etc. This seems to me to be a kind of genocide, a cultural genocide of a whole people, correct?
That is absolutely true. The evidence conclusively shows that. We can even see it. On some of the lists, it gives like an official prison sentence. Somebody sentenced to many years in prison, and the official charge is like disturbing the social order or like endangering national security. And what they actually did, some other spreadsheets record what they actually accused of, which is, for example, some very cultural religious practice, such as wearing a veil, or simply sort of being associated with people who have been in prior detention. Among those accused is a nursing mother who was initially not detained because she has just been nursing her child, mother in her early 20s, but then soon after she was detained and then sentenced to over 10, I think 16 years in prison, if I remember correctly, on supposed charges of disturbing the social order and inciting trouble. A 20-something-year-old nursing mother. So we clearly see this is a way to preemptively intern an entire population, change an entire population, and that is a telltale sign of a mass atrocity.
Adrian, Zenz, it's shocking stuff. I urge people to look at what you have uncovered. Just search your name on Twitter or Google. You've got all the files there. I think this is just devastating. Thank you very much for alerting the world.
Thank you.